The New Orleans Saints injury concerns continue. Enough going on over in the offensive side, but now it's the defense that loses a major contributor. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net, Saints analyst on WWL TV. And on today's episode, it's our bonus Saturday episode, 5 things you need to know ahead of this New Orleans Saints game. But I promise you a lot of it is going to be very injury related, because that's just the story of this game. We're going to take a look at why Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill will be the biggest, I don't even want to call them X factors, but they could be the biggest weapons for the New Orleans Saints in this game against the Atlanta Falcons. And the success of this team kind of hinges on their production. We'll take a look at Chris Olave, who suffered a hamstring injury in Friday's practice, one of 3 wide receivers hurt during practices this week for New Orleans. How tough will he be to replace? The answer, very. Then we're going to lead everything off here with our kickoff. Take a look at Demario Davis, who is going to miss the first game of his career due to injury, and it's a major loss for the New Orleans Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll be set up with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the New Orleans Saints dealing with a ton of injuries, and it's going to make things really, really challenging for them to be able to circumvent as they go ahead to their game week 4 against the Atlanta Falcons. And perhaps the biggest injury that they are suffering is the loss of Demario Davis, who is ruled out with a hamstring injury for this game. Demario Davis had similar issues or similar hamstring soft tissue issues over the course of the training camp for the New Orleans Saints. But now this is the first time that he's ever going to miss a game due to injury. He did have a COVID miss a couple of years ago in the 2020-2021 season. It was against the Miami Dolphins when no one played. But this is major. This is massive for the New Orleans Saints, because this is completely uncharted territory for them. Playing without offensive linemen, playing without skill position players, playing without corners. This is something the New Orleans Saints have just unfortunately had to deal with over the course of the past few years. But one thing that they have not had to learn how to do is compete, play, and most of all, win without Demario Davis, who is the heartbeat, not just of the New Orleans Saints defense, but the New Orleans Saints team as a whole. So how will they get it done? Well, here's what I will say. The Saints made good investments at linebacker over the course of this offseason. And so I think that they will be better on the second level than people will expect them to be. But that's not to say that there won't be a drop-off from Demario Davis to the other guys, because there absolutely will be. But is that drop-off enough to end up forcing the New Orleans Saints defense into a situation where they are playing not so complimentary football, not so winning football? I don't know. I don't know yet. Because again, this is uncharted territory for New Orleans, but are they at risk of it? Absolutely yes. I was asked all the time over the course of the offseason, if the Saints were to lose one of Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, who would have the biggest impact? And as much as I really love what Tyrann Mathieu has done to begin this season, Cam Jordan's already kind of taken a different role in this offense, letting guys like Carl Granderson as well as Chase Young, who we'll discuss a little bit later, kind of take the lead when it comes to pass rush, right? Both those guys at 70 or above in terms of their snap percentage. Cam Jordan under 50%, on track for his lowest so far in his career. We kind of expected that to be the case coming into the season in terms of what his new role was. So the guy that has the biggest role and that still has the quarterback of the defense title, Demario Davis, was the guy that I looked at and said, oh, that's the one that has the biggest impact for you. I honestly think that's why New Orleans is kind of playing it safe here, right? I mean, I saw Demario Davis in the locker room and everything, and I would say he wants to play, right? I mean, that's always been Demario's kind of demeanor. Last year, he had an injury that everyone said he wouldn't be able to play on, and he said, watch this. And then he ended up playing a really good game on that injury, or despite that injury. Could he do it again here? Sure, probably. But the New Orleans Saints have already shown over the course of the last 2 weeks that they're not willing to risk a potential 1 week absence turn into a long-term absence. Marshawn Lattimore was a game time decision against the Dallas Cowboys, very much wanted to play, made the push, was very close to going. Dennis Allen, not allowing him to play, held him back, and then being able to get him back out on the field the very next week. Taysom Hill dealing with that chest injury, which Jay Glazer reported was a bruised lung. So a little bit of saving him from himself, potentially, when it came to not playing him against the Philadelphia Eagles. But now he's back after being elevated to full participation and being listed with no game designation, meaning he's good to go up against the Atlanta Falcons. So the Saints have played this very, very cautiously when it comes to these soft tissue injuries or injuries to very important players. So I could see the New Orleans Saints doing the same thing here with Demario Davis and saying, hey, shutting you down for this week, get you back out on the field up against the Kansas City Chiefs in a big Monday night game in the following week. I could see that being the case for Demario Davis. So what do the New Orleans Saints do without Demario Davis? Well, let me tell you what I understand is going to happen. And the first thing that I'll mention is something that Willie Gay said specifically. New Orleans Saints new linebacker Willie Gay Jr., who they signed over the course of the offseason, who has experience playing all three linebacker spots. He's been asked about comfortability across those three. If there's a spot that he's most comfortable, he's pretty comfortable with all of it. But I will say that he did play the will linebacker or coverage linebacker role a lot more during his time in college than when he arrived in the NFL and they moved him over to the strong side linebacker spot over in Kansas City. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to see Pete Werner move over to become the Mike, the green dot, right? He'll have the helmet with the communication system so that he can make calls, make adjustments, have the communication with the sideline and with the players, all that kind of stuff. So he'll be that guy. Willie Gay will move into Pete Werner's will linebacker spot. So he's going to be a little bit more in coverage, a little bit more sideline to sideline. And I believe it's going to be DeMarco Jackson, who the team leans on at strong side linebacker in those sub packages. They could also go with Anthony Orji, but it does sound like DeMarco Jackson is going to be active this week and that he will be the one that they rely on as a starter, quote unquote, in some of those packages, right? Those sub packages and things like that. That's my understanding. I could very much see Orji end up being the one that also gets snaps in those situations and things like that. Both of them had very strong camps, but just looking back at what it is the Saints did while Demario Davis was out during training camp, DeMarco Jackson got a load of those snaps. So I would expect that to be the case now that he's back and healthy from his injury. So that's my expectation so far. We'll see how things go. I don't know how often the Saints will be in base, 3 linebackers, 4 defensive linemen, versus how many times they'll be a nickel with just the 2 linebackers. But it is going to be an educational experience here to see what the tandem of Pete Werner and Willie Gay Jr. look like together, because Pete Werner got his extension. Willie Gay Jr. is currently on a 1-year deal, but could get an extension after this season. So could the New Orleans Saints see their future at the linebacker spot in these 2 players? They get an early glimpse at it here against Atlanta in a game where Kyle Pitts is going to be a big-time target, the Atlanta Falcons tight end, especially after the Saints gave up some big yardage to Dallas Goedert, the Philadelphia Eagles tight end, and in a game where you're going to have to cover guys like Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, not just in the running game, but in the passing game out of the backfield as well. So those linebackers will be put to the test. If they stand up to it, that means really, really good things for New Orleans as they move forward and look ahead to their future. Now, things do get very tough for the New Orleans Saints, who are not only dealing with injuries that impact their run game, but are now dealing with 3 big injuries that impact their passing game, including a hamstring injury for Chris Olave, who will be near impossible to replace. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Robinhood. And with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to be able to eat up all of the financial favors of the top 1%. Robinhood Gold allows you to be able to get the rates and perks that are usually reserved for the folks of high society. Now, a resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn a very liberal 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides you the privileges of the high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for just $5 a month. The gold standard is now here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up today at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investment involves risk. Rate may change, and gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Today's episode of Locked On Saints also brought to you by friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. No mystery lineups, no trying to win a slice of a big pie and win yourself 61 cents for playing throughout the weekend or anything like that. You can win up to 100 times your entry back over at PrizePicks by simply getting 4 projections right. Here's how it works. You pick 2 to 6 players, and then PrizePicks is going to give you projections. For instance, Josh Allen, more or less than 250 passing yards. Tyreek Hill, more or less than 90 receiving yards, things like that. You pick more or less, you get those right, and then boom, you can win up to 100 times your entry back. Go and check them out today. Download the PrizePicks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints could end up being without wide receiver Chris Olave, which would be a huge hole in their offense. Even if they do have Chris Olave, though, the wide receiver room has been impacted greatly over the course of this week. Let's break it all down as we continue on with our 5 things that you need to know. Number 2 is that Chris Olave is dealing with a hamstring injury. So Chris Olave's hamstring injury set in over the course of Friday's practice. He is now the 3rd wide receiver to suffer an injury in practice for the New Orleans Saints this week. A.T. Perry with a hamstring injury that set in on Wednesday. Cedrick Wilson Jr. with an ankle injury that he suffered on Thursday. And then now Chris Olave, hamstring injury on Friday, which did happen according to Nick Underhill over at NewOrleans.football during Friday's practice. Less than ideal for the New Orleans Saints. Now, I do want to be clear. I think this is simply bad luck for New Orleans. Although, look, here, okay, let me rephrase that. The New Orleans Saints need to take a real long, hard look at their soft tissue injuries because 2022, it got better. 2023, not so much. 2024, it has been dismal in terms of their ability to keep their players healthy when it comes to those soft tissue injuries. We've seen groin injury on groin injury on groin injury, calf injury on calf injury on calf injury, hamstring injury on hamstring injury on hamstring injury. It has been an issue for New Orleans. So whatever it is that worked for them in 2022, they either got away from or it's simply not working anymore. And the New Orleans Saints need to figure out how to approach this and try to make this as best as they can. You can only control so much when it comes to injuries, but there was some improvement, and now there isn't. Something has changed, or something's no longer working and needs to change. We'll see what the New Orleans Saints end up doing about it. I don't know what you do about it mid-season. It might be something you have to visit over the course of the offseason, but there is a lot of question marks right now hovering around the New Orleans Saints' inability to keep its players healthy. This has been something we've been talking about since over the course of the offseason, when I mentioned like the one thing that makes me feel like the New Orleans Saints aren't going to be successful this season, along with the offense not churning, which it did right off the bat, was health. And so far, the New Orleans Saints not doing great in that category. But here's where I want to really focus on top of all this, because on top of that, the New Orleans Saints are also in a situation here to where they're going to have to rely on some young players to get some production at wide receiver. So now you have the A.T. Perry injury, you have the Cedrick Wilson Jr. Injury, and now you have the Chris Olave injury. And what I was beginning to say too is that I think some level of this is just bad luck, right? Like having that happen 3 days in a row to 3 different wide receivers, that's just simply bad luck, right? Like that's one of those things where you literally can't do anything about that. But if you're able to kind of mitigate the concern of soft tissue injuries to a grander scale, the way that the Saints were a couple of years ago, then maybe you would be talking about this a little bit differently, or at least the results would vary, right? But having that happen 3 days in a row, sometimes you just get the hand that's dealt to you, right? So Chris Olave could still play. He and Cedrick Wilson could both still play. They're both listed as questionable. And we've seen Chris Olave play through injury before. Remember, he suffered an injury. It was an ankle injury, if I remember correctly, before the Week 5 game last year against the New England Patriots, and still played in that game, which was an absolute rout of the Patriots, who, yes, were a poor team, but it was a good win that the New Orleans Saints needed. So it's not inconceivable that Chris Olave could still play in this game. But considering how cautious the Saints have been about soft tissue injuries so far this year, because of the amount of them that they've unfortunately had to kind of figure out and combat, could we see the New Orleans Saints play it super cautious with Chris Olave and say, no, going to try to make it happen with the younger guys? You still have Rashid Shaheed. But here's the other thing. You only have now 3 healthy players when it comes to that wide receiver position. You've got Rashid Shaheed, and you've got 2 young players, rookies, in drafted rookie Bub Means, as well as undrafted free agent rookie in Mason Tipton. I expect that the Saints will likely elevate Equanimeous St. Brown, who gives you another big body, gives you another solid pass catcher, and gives you somebody who can block in the run game, which is going to be very important because the New Orleans Saints are going to need to run like crazy in this game. But there's still talent here. Mason Tipton is somebody that the New Orleans Saints are really excited about. Bub Means is somebody that I'm really excited about, and I think the New Orleans Saints are excited about as well. So here's their opportunity to step in and step up. One of the things that you hear from every single receiver that you talk to, depth, starter, whatever, is that everyone has to be ready to play every role when it comes to those wide receivers. Let's see if they're ready to play those roles during this game. So I think that's going to be another big one to watch. All right, let's get to number 3 of 5 in terms of things that you need to know for this one. Not only are the New Orleans Saints dealing with injuries when it comes to their passing game, they're dealing with injuries when it comes to their run game and pass protection as well. Not only is Erik McCoy out, of course, on injured reserve, undergoing surgery, 6 to 8 weeks is the expected timeline for him. So I wouldn't probably expect him back until the December 1st game against Los Angeles Rams post the bye week. But now the Saints are also going to be without Cesar Ruiz, who they ruled out on Friday dealing with a knee injury. I want to be very clear. Cesar Ruiz left Sunday's game against the Philadelphia Eagles with an injury, came back in a play later. That was an ankle issue. This knee issue is an entirely different thing. So here's what the New Orleans Saints are likely going to do on their offensive line. Here's what I'm expecting. You keep Lucas Patrick at left guard, you keep Taliesin Fuanga at left tackle, and you keep Trevor Penning at right tackle. This gives you the opportunity to preserve 3 of your 5 starters from the beginning of the season. Landon Young can come in at right guard in place of Cesar Ruiz, and then the newly signed up from the practice squad to the active roster, Shane Lemieux, can play center for you. This allows you to be able to preserve as much of your offensive line as possible, replace one offensive lineman with another that has a lot of experience with your team already in Landon Young, and again, who I contend is one of the smartest players on this roster, and then also gives you an opportunity to finally have a quintessential backup center to jump in and be able to play for you in Shane Lemieux. I would not be surprised to see somebody like Kyle Hergel potentially as well elevated on Saturday later on today from the practice squad, along with Equanimeous St. Brown, to give the team some numbers on the offensive line, especially with their linebacker core now being healthier. DeMarco Jackson, I expect to be active. They've got Anthony Orji. They could potentially choose to elevate Isaiah Stallbird again, but that would be his final elevation. So we'll see exactly which way New Orleans goes. I said that the linebacker room would be healthy, but of course, Demario Davis is out. But you know what I mean, for the guys that play special teams and things like that. So we'll see which way they go, but that's what I'm expecting for the New Orleans Saints offensive line. But this is going to be big for New Orleans. This is going to be big for Derek Carr and for Clint Kubiak as well, because it becomes kind of a banner win for both of them, especially Clint Kubiak, if he's able to game plan this team, utilizing his system, utilizing his scheme to make up for these absences. This becomes a banner win for him in terms of showing what it is that he can do. So I'm highlighting all these injuries, but it doesn't mean that the New Orleans Saints are going to lose this game. And in fact, it means that if they get a win, the win will be all the more sweet, and especially over on the offensive side of the football. Coming up next, I want to stick with the offensive side of the football, but let's get away from the injuries for a second. I want to tell you why Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill are the most important players in this matchup. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, which is where you can go as an NFL fan right now to get started this season with a big return with America's #1 sportsbook. So whenever you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you want to know more, you can actually go over to FanDuel Sportsbook app and take a look at the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more in the same page where you're placing your bets as well. So you're getting all the knowledge and you're getting on the action all at the same time. And speaking of the action, the New Orleans Saints, the gap just keeps widening when it comes to the spread. The New Orleans Saints now 3-point underdogs in this game. They started at 1.5. The line moved to 2.5-point underdogs. They went back to 1.5-point underdogs. And now they're at 3-point underdogs in this game. So if maybe you like the New Orleans Saints against the spread, or maybe you like the New Orleans Saints to still surprise and win this game, definitely something you can check out today over at America's #1 sportsbook with FanDuel. And right now, you're going to be able to get started as a new customer with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I think the two most important skill position players in this game for the New Orleans Saints are becoming Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. Why? Because of all the versatility that they bring to the field. Now, I will say that Alvin Kamara, who's been dealing with a hip and rib injury over the course of this week, is listed as questionable going into this game, but our expectation as of right now is that he will play. And if he plays, which we expect, I think he and Taysom Hill, who was a full participation, no injury designation, no game designation, so he is good to go, are the most important players outside of the offensive line, right? We know it all starts in the trenches. That is a given. Those two guys, though, become the most important weapons for Derek Carr in this offense. And here is why. It's the versatility for me, right? It's the fact that Alvin Kamara can not only run outside the tackles, but you can run him in between the tackles if you need to, but you'd love to get him outside the tackles. You'd love to get him in space, all of those other things. But on top of that, you also get the opportunity to utilize him in the passing game, and not just the passing game by having him run routes out of the backfield, but in a game where the Saints could be dealing with 3 wide receiver injuries to some extent, even if Chris Olave plays, hampered, even if Cedrick Wilson plays, hampered, that could end up being a limitation for them. So seeing the Saints be able to utilize Alvin Kamara in the slot, out wide, lining him up at wide receiver, moving him around the offense so that he's not just playing the bell cow running back role that limited him over the course of the past few seasons, that to me is another humongous way that he becomes a big part of the New Orleans Saints in terms of being a weapon for them. So not only could you see Alvin Kamara, for instance, in the backfield with Adam Prentice leading the way, with Taysom Hill leading the way, but you could also see him not in the backfield at all, but lined up at wide receiver, lined up in the slot, lined up out wide, while Jamal Williams is in the backfield. I mean, we've seen some really interesting things from Clint Kubiak so far this season, to where he's lined up Alvin Kamara outside. He's lined up Rashid Shaheed in the backfield and Chris Olave on the outside. You can do some interesting things, even if you're hampered at the wide receiver position, because of what Alvin Kamara can give you as a receiver and as a route runner, not just out of the backfield, but moving around the offense. So I'd very much expect that for the New Orleans Saints in terms of their ability to move him around and allow him to be able to contribute from multiple positions so that he can help you get over some of the injuries that you're dealing with, not only in the run game, but also in the passing game. Taysom Hill, same thing. Same thing when it comes to Taysom. You can run with him out of the backfield. He can be a lead blocker for Alvin Kamara, giving you additional blocking prowess ahead of him behind that offensive line that's dealing with some key injuries on the interior. No starting center, no starting right guard. He can also line up at tight end. He can line up in the slot. You can line him up out wide. You can line him up at quarterback and run with him. There's so many different things that you can do with Taysom Hill. And so him returning in a week where the New Orleans Saints are dealing with a ton of injuries is almost as perfect as you can get when it comes to getting the backup that you need to be able to produce on the field on Sunday. And we know that Taysom Hill has been a very, very good player against the Atlanta Falcons. For whatever reason, he just always seems to be able to make plays against Atlanta. The issue when they've lost and he's made plays is the lack of plays being made outside of him, that's where Alvin Kamara in this new offensive system comes in. So I do think that Kamara and Hill become the New Orleans Saints' best weapons in this game. And I'm going to give a little bit of an honorary shout out here too, because I've always talked about respecting Rashid Shaheed's gangsta. And this is a game where that needs to be on full display as well. Not just Rashid Shaheed in terms of his ability to be able to run multiple routes and being able to attack not only the deep area of the field, but also the intermediate and short area of the field, get him involved there, get him some yards after catch opportunities, things like that. But then also line him up in the backfield, run the jet sweep with him, the end arounds, things like that. Do the things that will give him an opportunity to be able to contribute to you from multiple angles as well, and try to take advantage of what has been a not so great run defense by the Atlanta Falcons and a not so great pass rush by the Atlanta Falcons. The issue is that New Orleans can't make those units better for Atlanta, right? By struggling on the opposite side of things. But in any case, you have these versatile pieces and these versatile players that should be able to contribute from a variety of different ways to help you keep your offense going when you're dealing with all of these injuries. So something to watch just in terms of how they utilize Alvin Kamara, how they utilize Taysom Hill, how they utilize Rashid Shaheed from multiple areas on their offense to be able to make up for some of what they are losing or have lost or might lose due to injuries. Again, we still don't know when it comes to Cedrick Wilson Jr. and Chris Olave if they will play, but got to be ready. Got to be ready for sure. All right, finally, number 5. Last thing you need to know is that the New Orleans Saints aren't the only ones dealing with injuries. The Atlanta Falcons are going to be dealing with some big-time injuries on their offensive line that could spell big days for defensive ends Carl Granderson and Chase Young here in New Orleans. Let's break down why. So while the New Orleans Saints are without their starting center and their starting right guard, the Atlanta Falcons will be without their starting center and their starting right tackle in Caleb McGarry. Caleb McGarry still not being able to come back from that knee injury in time, just as Aaron Freeman predicted on Thursday's crossover episode. If you didn't catch that, you can hear him speak a little bit more about that as well. Atlanta was kind of trying to play the gamesmanship thing, like, oh, well, we're not really ruling him out just yet. And then there was like, yeah, okay, well, he's out. So it's going to be former New Orleans Saint Storm Norton, who's going to be starting at right tackle for the New Orleans Saints. For the Atlanta Falcons. That is a good matchup for the Saints. Not just because it's Storm Norton, but because you're talking about a backup right tackle, all these other things. Now, I will acknowledge this. The New Orleans Saints, for whatever reason, up against the Atlanta Falcons, have played against that team before with reserves on their offensive line and have not been able to make good on it. I think that we've seen some fans be kind of a little bit exhausted by that and things like that. I think this game is where that changes. Carl Granderson and Chase Young have been outstanding so far this season from a pressure perspective. 18 pressures each, according to Next Gen Stats, tied for 4th most right now in the NFL after Thursday Night Football. That's really solid, right? Think about this. The New Orleans Saints created only 50 pressures over the course of their first 3 games as a team last season. Right now, they've got about 62 to 65, depending upon whose metrics you look at, and 36 of them have come from Carl Granderson and Chase Young by themselves. So just 14 shy of taking care of everything the New Orleans Saints did last year with just 2 players this year in Granderson and Young. So this could be a very big game for them. And that could turn this game around for the New Orleans Saints on the offensive side, because if they're forcing Kirk Cousins into some of those kind of chaotic moments, right? It was Aaron Freeman on Thursday mentioned not making bozo plays when it comes to Kirk Cousins. Well, if they can force him into some of those bozo plays, the New Orleans Saints secondary has proven to be very opportunistic. And of all the different injuries that you're seeing across the New Orleans Saints, the Saints secondary is coming into this game pretty healthy. They're ready to go. Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alante Taylor, Will Harris, and Tyrann Mathieu all ready to go. Tyrann Mathieu has a takeaway in each of the last 4 games going back to last season. Can he make it 5? And if the New Orleans Saints can give their offense shorter fields, it gives them a better opportunity to put points on the board despite the injuries that they have, and allows them to play ahead of the sticks a little bit. So look for the New Orleans Saints defense to try to be a difference maker in this game, even without Demario Davis, which is a big loss for them, but you got a lot of athleticism with Willie Gay Jr. You got a lot of athleticism with Pete Werner. You got a lot of smarts between those two as well. So if the second level can hold it down and the defensive line can get pressure and the secondary can do what the secondary does, then the Saints could be in advantageous situations for their kind of patch-made offense, if you will, going into this game. So could be the big-time difference maker for New Orleans, which sets up guys like Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, Rashid Shaheed, potentially Chris Olave, and let's not leave out Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson. If their offensive line can hold up against what has been one of the worst pressure teams in the NFL so far with the Atlanta Falcons, and those tight ends get the opportunity to run routes, they can have an impact too. So let's not sleep on them. But I think the defense could go a long way to setting up some of those advantageous short field opportunities so that you can at least get some Blake Groupie field goals out of this game as well. All right, y'all. That's it. That's the 5 things you need to know. I will be live on the floor of Mercedes-Benz Stadium after the game, win, lose, or draw in Atlanta, and we'll break it all down later on tomorrow. We appreciate you very much as always. Make it as your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL so you can get everything you need to know around the league. And check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show as well. We appreciate you very much as always for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.